The HFY were one of the most feared species in the galaxy. Their armies had crushed countless civilizations, and their ships were faster, stronger, and more advanced than anything humanity had ever dreamed of. The HFY were a warrior race, ruthless and brutal. They conquered worlds not because they needed them, but because they enjoyed the challenge. They believed they were invincible. And then there was Emily, a 10-year-old human girl who had no idea just how much her world was about to change. Emily had been playing outside when the HFY struck. She had been visiting her grandparents on a quiet little farm far from the busy cities of Earth. The sky was clear, the air fresh with the scent of grass, and everything was peaceful. But in a flash, everything changed. Bright lights flashed from the sky, followed by the loud roar of an alien ship descending into the fields. It was huge, dark, and terrifying, with weapons that could destroy entire buildings in seconds. The alien ship landed in the field just a few hundred meters from where Emily had been playing. Her heart raced as the ground shook beneath her feet. She saw the massive alien soldiers step off their ship, tall, terrifying, and covered in thick armor. At first, Emily didn't understand what was happening, but when they saw her, the HFY soldiers knew exactly what to do. They didn't care who she was. To them, she was nothing but a tiny human, a weak creature who would either obey their orders or be destroyed. They quickly grabbed her, pulling her from the field and into their ship without a word. The moment she was inside the ship, Emily's fear began to settle into something else. Confusion. Why had they taken her? What did they want from her? The soldiers didn't speak to her, and there was no one else in the ship to answer her questions. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines as they began to lift off. She could feel the ship's power, its speed, as it shot toward the stars. Emily had never been so far from home. Her hands shook, but she quickly wiped the tears away. She was scared, yes, but there was something else too. A quiet, deep feeling that she wasn't helpless. She might be small, she might be just a child, but she wasn't going to let fear control her. As the ship flew deeper into space, Emily was taken to a cold, metal cell. The door slammed shut behind her with a loud bang. The walls were bare, the lights dim. It looked like a place meant for prisoners, not someone like her. Emily pressed her hands against the cold bars, trying to think. What could she do? She was alone in an alien ship, surrounded by enemies who were known to destroy entire worlds. But Emily didn't give up. She knew her parents, her teachers, and everyone else had always told her to think, to never give up, to always look for a way out, no matter how impossible things seemed. And right now, it seemed impossible, but she wouldn't stop. She looked around the cell carefully. The walls were smooth, with no doors or windows, but there was a small panel on the wall near the corner. It was faintly glowing. Emily walked over, crouched down, and tried to figure out what it was. It looked like some kind of control panel, but she didn't know how to use it. Still, she reached out and pressed a button. To her surprise, the panel lit up even brighter, and the door to her cell opened. Emily blinked, unsure if she was seeing things, but before she could react, she heard voices, alien voices. The HFY were coming back. She quickly ducked into the shadows, holding her breath. She knew they would never expect her to be able to escape. They thought she was just a weak human, no different from any other. But Emily was different. She was determined, smart, and brave. The HFY soldiers walked past her, not even noticing the small human girl hidden in the shadows. Emily held perfectly still, her heart pounding in her chest. This was her chance. She had no idea what she was doing, but she had to try. She couldn't just sit and wait to be a prisoner. With the soldiers gone, Emily slowly made her way down the narrow corridor. She kept her steps quiet, watching every turn, every door. She had no map, no guide, but she had her mind and her will, and that was enough. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the ship seemed to tremble slightly. Emily felt a wave of excitement rush through her. Could it be? Was something going wrong with the ship's systems? She didn't know, but whatever it was her chance. If the ship was malfunctioning, it was the perfect time to act. Emily crept further, her small frame barely noticed in the darkness of the ship. She had no idea what she would find, but one thing was clear. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was someone that HFY would have to reckon with, and she wasn't going to let them forget it. The HFY had a reputation. They were the strongest warriors in the galaxy, feared by all who crossed their path. Their fleet of warships was nearly unstoppable, their soldiers ruthless and nearly indestructible. There was no species that had managed to defeat them, no empire that had survived their brutal invasions. For years, that HFY had been the true masters of space, ruling over countless planets with an iron fist. They believed they were untouchable. But as their ships flew deeper into space, carrying Emily farther and farther from Earth, the HFY began to realize something. They were about to face a problem unlike anything they had encountered before. Inside the dark halls of their ship, the alien leaders met in a cold, sterile room. Their powerful bodies were covered in thick, scared armor, the symbols of their conquests marking their faces and the shoulders of their uniforms. They were discussing the human prisoners they had taken, the small, weak species they had captured. But Emily wasn't just any prisoner. "Why do we waste time with these humans?" one of the generals growled, his voice deep and menacing. "They are nothing but insects. Let them sit in their cells." Another leader, taller and more decorated, shook his head. "We don't know enough about them. The humans have been troublesome lately. They've been resisting us. And their technology. It's unpredictable. We cannot afford to take chances." The rest of the room fell silent. The HFY had been caught off guard by humanity's surprising defiance. They had thought humans were weak, easy to control. But something was different this time. There was a spark in the human spirit they hadn't expected. And that spark was about to change everything. Back in the dark corridors of the ship, Emily was learning more than she had ever imagined. She had managed to slip away from her cell and was now wandering through the massive HFY vessel. It was a strange, dark place, full of unfamiliar sounds and alien technology that she couldn't understand. But Emily wasn't afraid. She was determined to find a way to stop the HFY from carrying out whatever plans they had. She had heard the leaders talking earlier. She didn't know exactly what they were planning, but she could tell that they were dangerous, very dangerous. And no one, not even the mighty HFY, would expect a small child like her to be a threat. That was exactly what gave her the upper hand. Emily had noticed something strange in the halls. The walls, though made of metal, seemed to hum with energy. She had no idea what kind of power was running through the ship, but it was clear that this vessel was alive with technology she could never have imagined back on Earth. She was out of her depth, but she had a sharp mind and a will to fight. That was all she needed. Her eyes scanned the ship's control panels as she crept along. She didn't know how to use them, but she could feel that something was off. There was a problem. Something wasn't working the way it should. The hum of the ship was uneven, the lights flickering in certain parts of the ship. She didn't know it yet, but she had just triggered a small malfunction in the system. The HFY, meanwhile, were growing increasingly frustrated. Despite their power, they couldn't understand why their technology was failing. Their weapon systems weren't responding as they should, and their fleet was suddenly experiencing strange issues. The ship's engines, once perfectly synchronized, now seemed to stutter and sputter. Something was wrong, but no one could figure out why. One of the HFY generals stormed into the control room, his sharp features twisted in anger. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Why is our ship malfunctioning?" We don't know, General," one of the technicians stammered. "The systems are unstable. We are trying to correct it, but it is spreading. It is affecting everything." The general slammed his fist against the wall, frustration and fear boiling within him. "Find out who is responsible for this and deal with them," he snarled. "Now." But they were already too late. Emily's actions, though small, had already set something in motion that the HFY couldn't stop. In a matter of moments, the ship was on the verge of complete system failure. The power grid was failing, the lights flickering in all corners of the ship. The mighty HFY, who had conquered entire planets, now found themselves in a race against time, trying to fix the damage caused by a single unknowing human child. Emily, hidden in the shadows, was unaware of the chaos she had just caused. She was moving quickly, determined to get to the ship's main control room. If she could find the core systems, she might be able to do even more damage. She had no idea how, but she had learned one thing. The HFY were powerful, but they were not invincible. And she, Emily, might just be the one to show them that. With every step she took, she could feel the ship trembling beneath her feet. The mighty HFY, once confident in their strength, were now facing the consequences of underestimating a small human child. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were the masters of the universe. But Emily was about to prove them wrong. Emily's small hands trembled, but her heart was strong. As she crept through the dark corridors of the alien ship, her mind raced with possibilities. The ship was huge and full of strange technology, but Emily wasn't afraid. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to keep moving. The HFY thought she was just a child, weak and scared, but she had something they didn't, strength that came from within. The HFY were warriors. They had the power of advanced weapons and technology, but Emily had learned one thing in her short life. Real strength wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about courage, willpower, and using your mind when everyone else would give up. And Emily had those in abundance. The ship was a maze of metal walls, twisting hallways, and blinking lights. Emily wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she had to keep moving. She didn't have much time. The HFY were already looking for her. They thought she had escaped, and they were going to punish her. They didn't realize that by underestimating her, they had made their biggest mistake. As she moved deeper into the ship, Emily found a control panel. It was a strange sight, wires and buttons she didn't recognize. But Emily had learned to pay attention to details. Back home, her father had taught her to always keep her eyes open, to never stop thinking, even when things seemed impossible. This was no different. With a deep breath, Emily stepped forward and touched the panel. It buzzed, then lit up. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea how it worked, but she had done it before. The HFY had been careless, leaving systems open for anyone who dared to try. She quickly pressed a few more buttons, and to her surprise, a series of lights flashed on the panel. A map of the ship appeared. For a moment, Emily froze. She stared at the map, her mind racing. She had no idea what she was looking at, but she could see that the ship had a central control room, the heart of the ship. If she could get there, maybe she could do something. Something that would stop the HFY from carrying out their plans. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. The HFY were coming. She had to move quickly. Emily turned and darted into a nearby maintenance shaft, squeezing through a narrow opening. Her small frame made it easy for her to slip through the tight spaces that the alien soldiers would never fit into. As she crawled through the dark shaft, she felt a strange calmness wash over her. The danger was real, but the fear had faded. Emily wasn't just a helpless child anymore. She had a purpose. The maintenance shaft led her to a series of stairs that descended deeper into the ship. Emily felt the ship's vibrations under her feet, the hum of the engines far below. The air felt colder the further she went, and the walls became more jagged, as if they were part of the ship's innermost core. She didn't know what she would find when she reached the control room, but she knew she had to try. Her legs were starting to ache, and she was beginning to feel the weight of her situation. But every time she thought about stopping, she remembered that HFY. They were the ones who had taken her from Earth. They were the ones who thought she was weak, and she couldn't let them win. Finally, She reached the control room. The door was large, metal, and heavily guarded. Two Sci-Fi soldiers stood outside, their weapons ready. Emily pressed herself against the wall, hidden in the shadows. She didn't have the strength to fight them, and she knew it. But she didn't need to fight them. She just needed to be clever. She waited, watching the soldiers closely. They were talking to each other in their strange alien language, unaware of the small human child hiding just a few feet away. Emily didn't move a muscle. She had learned patience over the past few hours, and now it was time to put that lesson to use. When the soldiers turned their backs, Emily quickly slipped past them, her heart racing. She knew it was a long shot, but she had to try. She was inside the control room now. The room was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were covered with strange screens and glowing buttons. At the center of the room was a large console, the heart of the ship's systems. Emily had no idea how it worked, but she knew this was her chance. This was the moment that could change everything. She stepped forward, her hands shaking as she reached for the console. The controls were unlike anything she had ever touched, but Emily didn't hesitate. She pressed one button, then another. The ship's systems buzzed, the lights flickering around her. She didn't know what she was doing, but she was doing something, and that was enough. The ship's systems began to malfunction. The engines sputtered, the lights flickered again, and Emily could feel the tremors beneath her feet. She didn't know if it was working, but she had a feeling it was. She had done it. She had proven to herself and to the HFY that she wasn't just a small, helpless human. She was more than that. She was clever, she was strong, and she was capable of things that HFY would never have believed possible. As the ship continued to shake, Emily smiled to herself. The HFY thought they were the most powerful beings in the galaxy, but she had just shown them that they were wrong. And that was the real power. The HFY soldiers were still on high alert. Their massive ships, once the perfect weapons of destruction, now seemed to be struggling. The lights flickered, the walls hummed with strange energy, and the floor shook slightly beneath their feet. The chaos wasn't something they had expected from a tiny human child. But Emily wasn't just any child. She had managed to slip into their control room, use their technology, and cause a series of malfunctions in their massive ship. Now, the aliens were searching for her, angry and confused. They couldn't understand how one little girl had caused so much damage. They thought they were the smartest beings in the galaxy. They had conquered entire planets, brought entire civilizations to their knees. But Emily had shown them that their power didn't make them invincible. They were far from it. Emily didn't have time to rest. She had caused the first wave of confusion, but now she needed to do more. If she could take control of the ship's main systems, maybe she could stop the HFY from carrying out their plans. Maybe she could even make them leave her and the rest of Earth alone. She crouched low in the shadows, her breathing slow and steady. She had to be careful. There were guards everywhere now, patrolling the hallways, looking for any sign of her. Emily wasn't a fighter. She didn't have the physical strength to defeat the HFY in battle, and she knew that. But she didn't need to fight them. She had learned that strength wasn't just about size or power. It was about using your mind, thinking 2 steps ahead. She had been paying close attention to the HFY's movements and the ship's systems. The aliens were angry, frustrated, but they were also making mistakes. They were no longer as careful as they had been before. They were rushing, panicking, and that gave Emily the opening she needed. She snuck through the hallways, staying hidden in the corners and behind walls. The HFY soldiers had no idea where she was, but they were starting to get close. She needed to find the main reactor room, the heart of the ship's power. If she could disrupt the power flow, the HFY would be forced to shut down the entire ship. But getting to the reactor room wouldn't be easy. There were more guards, more challenges ahead. Emily spotted a group of soldiers ahead. They were talking, distracted. Emily had to act fast. She pulled herself into a maintenance hatch that was just a few feet away. It was tight, small, and dark, but it was the perfect hiding spot. She breathed quietly, listening to the soldiers pass by. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had done this before. She had gotten this far because she kept her head clear and her mind focused. When the soldiers were out of sight, Emily slipped back out of the hatch. She was getting closer now. Her fingers brushed against the walls as she moved. The ship felt alive beneath her, pulsing with energy. Every step took her deeper into enemy territory. But she couldn't stop now. After a few minutes of walking carefully through the maze of halls, Emily found what she was looking for. A large door marked reactor loomed in front of her. Her heart skipped a beat. She had made it this far, but the real challenge was just beginning. The door was guarded by two Sci-Fi soldiers. They stood tall and menacing, weapons in hand. They hadn't noticed her yet, but if she didn't move quickly, they would. Emily thought quickly. The soldiers were standing in front of a control panel. She couldn't just rush them. She needed to outsmart them. She knew she couldn't fight them, but she could create a distraction. She glanced around the room. There were pipes running along the walls, and a few small, shiny tools lying on the ground. One tool caught her eye, a small wrench. Emily had no idea what it was for, but she didn't need to know. She grabbed it quietly and moved to the side of the hallway. She saw a loose pipe running just above the soldiers' heads. This was it. Emily took a deep breath and hurled the wrench at the pipe. It hit the metal with a loud clang, making the soldiers jump. They turned toward the noise, their weapons raised. But before they could react, Emily dashed forward, slipping past them and into the reactor room. The soldiers shouted in confusion, but it was too late. Emily was inside. Once she was in the room, she moved quickly. The reactor was huge, twisting pipes, flashing lights, and thick cables everywhere. She didn't know how it all worked, but she had learned enough about the ship's systems to know what to do. Emily found a small control panel near the reactor core. Her fingers hovered over the buttons as she took a deep breath. She didn't have time to figure out all the details, but she didn't need to. She had already caused enough chaos. With a few quick presses, she disabled the main power feed to the reactor. The lights flickered again, this time more violently, and the ship's humming grew weaker. Emily smiled, but she knew she couldn't stay long. She turned and sprinted out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. The Sci-Fi would realize what she had done soon, and they wouldn't be happy. But Emily had done it. She had found a way to hurt them where it counted. She had used her cleverness, her ability to think on her feet, to disrupt the most powerful ship in the galaxy. As she sprinted down the hallway, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. The soldiers were closing in. Emily didn't have time to hide. She had to keep moving. She had made her move. Now, it was only a matter of time before the Sci-Fi realized that they had underestimated the power of a small, clever human child. The ship trembled beneath Emily's feet, and she could hear the deep hum of the engine sputtering. Her heart raced, but she didn't slow down. She had done it. She had disabled the reactor's power feed. The Sci-Fi had no idea what was coming. Chaos was about to be unleashed, and Emily was at the center of it. She sprinted down the narrow corridors, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The once quiet ship now felt alive, shaking with power. She could hear alarms blaring in the distance, their sharp sounds cutting through the air. It was only a matter of time before the Sci-Fi realized the reactor was malfunctioning, and when they did, they would be desperate to fix it. But Emily wasn't going to stick around to find out. She had caused enough trouble. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she had to get out of there before the aliens came for her. As she rounded a corner, she came face to face with a group of Sci-Fi soldiers. They were larger than her, their dark green skin and sharp claws making them look even more terrifying up close. Their eyes glowed with anger, and they were ready for a fight. They had clearly realized something was wrong, and they were looking for whoever was responsible. Emily froze for a second, her mind racing. She didn't have a weapon. She wasn't strong enough to fight them. But she had one thing that Scythar didn't: speed and cleverness. She had learned to think quickly, to use her surroundings, to outsmart those who underestimated her. The soldiers raised their weapons, pointing them directly at Emily. There was no time to hide. She had to make her move now. Without warning, Emily ducked low and darted between the soldiers' legs. The Scythar roared in surprise, but she was already ahead of them. She heard their weapons fire behind her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to waste a second. The ship was in chaos now. The lights flickered in and out, and the floor shook harder with each passing moment. It was as if the very heart of the ship was losing its strength, and Emily's actions had set it all in motion. She sprinted down a different hallway, her breath quick and shallow. The soldiers were still chasing her, but she was faster. She ducked into another maintenance shaft, her small body easily slipping through the narrow opening. The Scythar soldiers, too large to follow, roared in frustration from the other side. Emily didn't stop. She crawled through the dark passageway as quickly as she could, her mind focused on one goal: escape. The ship was falling apart, and it was getting harder to stay ahead of the Scythar. She could hear their footsteps above her, their voices angry and confused as they tried to find a way to track her. Finally, she reached a vent near the ship's outer walls. She paused for a moment, listening to the sounds of the soldiers getting closer. They were determined to catch her, but Emily knew this was her only chance. With one final burst of energy, Emily crawled through the vent, pushing her way through the narrow space. She could feel the cold air from the outside of the ship rushing toward her. She knew she was almost there. The vent opened onto the ship's outer hull. The view was breathtaking. The stars stretched out before her, so close and so vast. She could see the massive alien fleet surrounding the ship, hundreds of Scythar ships floating in space. But Emily didn't have time to admire the view. She had to act fast. She pulled herself out of the vent and stood on the edge of the ship's hull. The ship was still shaking, its systems failing with each passing second. The chaos she had caused was spreading. The Scythar were losing control, and they had no idea how to fix it. The once mighty fleet was beginning to crumble. The universe felt different now. Quiet. Empty. The once mighty Scythar fleet, an unstoppable force, was slowly losing its power. The massive ships that had once ruled the galaxy were now drifting aimlessly, their engines sputtering, their systems failing. The chaos Emily had set in motion was working. The Scythar were in full retreat. From where Emily floated in space, watching the destruction unfold, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. She had done it. She had turned their own strength against them. She had shown the Scythar that no matter how powerful they thought they were not invincible. And now, it was clear, they were running. The Scythar fleet was in disarray. Their ships, once lined up in perfect formation, were now scattered and unstable. Their warriors, who had once been so confident and sure, were now panicked. There was no order anymore, no unity. The power that had once held them together was slipping away, and in its place, fear was growing. Emily watched as one of the larger ships, the command ship, began to drift away from the others. Its engines were completely offline, and there was no sign of any attempt to repair them. The Scythar inside the ship were still trying to regain control, but it was clear they had no idea how to fix the damage. The tiny human child had broken them. But Emily wasn't about to stop now. She had to make sure that Scythar were sent running for good. She turned toward the nearest Scythar ship, her emergency thrusters kicking in as she propelled herself forward. The alien ships were massive, but they were in no condition to fight back. Emily's mind raced as she looked for a way to push the attack further. She found what she was looking for: a weak point. The Scythar ships were built for power, not for speed or flexibility. They had enormous weapons, but their defenses were failing. Emily knew that if she could find the right spot, she could cause even more damage. She quickly scanned the ship's structure. She saw a hatch leading inside, guarded by two HFY soldiers. But Emily wasn't interested in the soldiers. She had no plans to fight them. Instead, she activated her thrusters and zoomed past them, moving so fast that the aliens didn't even see her. Inside the ship, it was even worse. The ship's walls were cracked, and sparks flew from broken wires. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The HFY inside were scrambling to get things working again, but the damage was too much. Emily could see the fear in their eyes. They knew it was over. She didn't stop. She moved deeper into the ship, looking for the core systems. The HFY had no idea how to stop the damage, and the longer they waited, the worse it would get. Emily's mission was clear: make sure they couldn't come back. She found the main control room. It was large, filled with screens and blinking lights, but none of it worked properly. The HFY soldiers here were frantic, trying to get the ship's systems online. They turned to face her, but it was too late. With quick, precise movements, Emily began to hack into the ship's control system. She had learned how to work with the alien technology, using their own tools against them. The soldiers tried to stop her, but they couldn't catch her. She moved too fast. The HFY were losing their grip, and Emily was in control now. She activated the self-destruct sequence. The countdown started. Emily didn't hesitate. She knew what she had to do. With one final look back at the ship, she leaped off the edge and into the open air. She spread her arms wide, feeling the cold vacuum of space rush past her. For a split second, she felt weightless, free from everything. But that feeling quickly passed. She wasn't safe yet. She activated the small emergency thrusters attached to her suit, propelling herself away from the ship. The HFY hadn't expected this. They had thought they could control everything, but they had underestimated Emily. As she flew through space, she watched the HFY ship behind her slowly begin to break apart. The power failure she had caused was spreading like wildfire, and soon the ship would be nothing more than a floating wreckage. Emily didn't know what would happen next, but she had done it. She had caused chaos. She had given the HFY a taste of what it felt like to lose control. And she had shown them that, no matter how powerful they thought they were no match for a small human with a clever mind and a determined heart. She kept moving, drifting farther away from the wreckage. The stars were endless around her, and she knew this was just the beginning. She had set something in motion, something that HFY would never forget. As the last of the HFY ships disappeared behind her, Emily smiled to herself. She had done the impossible. She had turned the tide. And now, the universe would know. Never underestimate a human. The soldiers looked at her, realizing what she had done. But they couldn't stop her. Their hands fumbled over their weapons, but the ship was already doomed. It didn't matter how much they tried. Emily had won. She turned and made her way back to the ship's outer hull. The HFY were still in shock, unsure of what to do next. Emily's heart pounded as she reached the edge of the ship. She knew that she had to escape before the self-destruct was triggered. With one last burst of speed, she activated her thrusters and shot away from the HFY ship. She could hear the alarms blaring behind her, but she didn't look back. The countdown was getting closer, and she needed to get as far away as possible. As she flew through space, she watched the HFY ship in the distance. It was glowing brighter now, the self-destruct countdown nearing its end. The lights on the ship flickered one last time before the entire vessel erupted in a fiery explosion. The shockwave sent ripples through the vacuum of space, shaking the surrounding ships. One by one, the HFY ships began to retreat. They had no choice. Their power was gone, their ships falling apart, and they were too afraid to fight. Emily had shown them that they could be defeated. The mighty HFY, once the greatest threat in the galaxy, were running away in fear. The fleet scattered, leaving the battlefield behind. The HFY knew they couldn't win. They had been bested by a small human child. The pride they had carried for so long was shattered. They were no longer the conquerors they had once been. They were the defeated. And Emily, floating alone in the vastness of space, watched it all unfold. She had done the impossible. She had made them flee. As the last of the HFY ships disappeared into the darkness of space, Emily allowed herself a small smile. The galaxy was safe. For now, the quiet of space was a strange feeling after all the chaos. Emily floated in the cold, endless void, her heart still racing from the events that had just unfolded. The HFY fleet, once the strongest force in the galaxy, was gone. They had retreated, shattered by her actions, and now, for the first time in a long time, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Emily had done what no one thought was possible. She had turned the tide. She had made the mighty HFY run for their lives. But even as she drifted through the stars, she knew that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The galaxy had never seen power like hers. She didn't need to be the strongest, the biggest, or the most powerful. Emily had shown that it was something else entirely that mattered. She had used her mind, her quick thinking, and her bravery. She had taken on the biggest threat the galaxy had ever known and turned their own strength against them. But there was more. Something had changed inside her. The victory over the HFY had unlocked a new kind of power, one that didn't rely on brute force or weapons, but on knowledge and skill. Emily understood now that this power, the power of the mind, was more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. She looked out at the stars, feeling the weight of what she had done. The HFY had always relied on their technology, their weapons, and their size. But now, they knew that they could be defeated. And it wasn't just the HFY. Every alien empire, every civilization in the galaxy now understood that there was something different about humanity. The power of the mind, the power of adaptability, the power of the human spirit. Emily realized that this was a new kind of strength. It was a force that didn't need to destroy, but it could outsmart, outblast, and overpower any enemy that came their way. As Emily continued to drift through space, she realized that she was no longer just a small human child. She was something more. She was a symbol of humanity's potential. The HFY had underestimated her because of her size, but they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had learned the hard way that humans were not to be underestimated. She was the proof that even the smallest being could make the biggest impact. She had shown the galaxy that it wasn't about strength alone, but about how one used it. And now, the universe would never forget the lesson she had taught. Emily's mind raced as she thought about the future. There were still dangers out there, more powerful enemies, and countless challenges ahead. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced the most terrifying force in the galaxy and come out victorious, and she had done it on her own terms. Her mind turned to the next step. The HFY were gone, but there were other threats out there. Other forces who might try to fill the power vacuum. She couldn't let them do that. She had to keep going. She had to keep showing the galaxy that humanity would not back down. That humanity could change the course of history. Emily activated her thrusters, beginning her journey toward a nearby planet. The stars stretched out before her, and she felt a strange sense of purpose. This was just the beginning. She was no longer just a little girl lost in space. She was someone who had the power to shape the future. The universe would never be the same again. As she neared the planet, Emily couldn't help but think of what she had done. The HFY had been forced to flee, but they would not forget. They would remember the name of the human child who had defeated them, who had made them run for their lives. And they would fear that name. They would fear what it represented, a new kind of power, the power of the mind, the power of humanity, the power of Emily. She didn't need to be the strongest. She didn't need to have the biggest weapon. All she needed was what she had: intelligence, bravery, and the unshakable belief that no matter how impossible it seemed, she could always find a way. She could always outsmart them. And that was the greatest power of all.